protest began at dawn on Tuesday with farmers surrounding the Prime Minister's residence and confronting security guards. By daylight, they had moved to Canberra Airport, abandoning their cars and farm vehicles, effectively blocking access roads. Once inside, they turned their attention on arriving politicians, especially Primary Industry Minister John Kerrin.
We're the backbone of the country. You know, every day, you have a feed every day. Who produces it? Well, I've heard all the stories.
From Canberra Airport, the protesting cavalcade moved to Parliament House, where the farmers circled the building before heading to the Treasury. There they lowered the Australian flag to half-mast and dumped bales of hay on the steps.
That represents 35% of farmers' income for a year.
Inconvenience to MPs,
following day, the farmers confronted the Prime Minister at Parliament House, where an angry exchange took place.
The rate of increase in costs under us is about half of under our predecessors. Now, why in the hell didn't you carry on then? When the rate of increase... No, you didn't.
Wait a minute, Mr.
No, you didn't.
But as the Prime Minister listened to the farmers' concerns over interest rates and excessive tax burdens, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The Prime Minister agreeing to visit Canowdra, the centre of the militant rural movement, and jeers turning to applause. For the third day in a row, farmers were up at dawn making it clear they want the federal government to fight hard for their interests when the Prime Minister travels to the US and Europe this week. The European Economic Community's policy of dumping goods on Australia's traditional markets will be high on the list of topics to be discussed. Also of great interest for the rural sector is the US Farm Bill. And visiting US Defence Secretary Caspar Weinberger gave the strongest indication yet that Prime Minister Hawke will get a sympathetic hearing when he meets with President Reagan.
But, a lot of us feel, and I know the President feels, that there's some unfortunate provisions in the Farm Bill, and we are trying to get those repaired as quickly as we can. There's a lot of feeling that a lot of people would like to have things changed in the Farm Bill.
At West Wallsend Primary School today, they held a special Halley's Comet Day. Most of the 300 youngsters at the school turned out in space costume. There was no shortage of kids dressed as comets, although many sported visible tails, unlike the comet itself. Hang on, is that Albert Einstein? Or maybe Professor Halley? Size didn't seem to matter, with even some of the youngest kids dressing up. As well as the parade, today's classroom activities also centred on the comet. Even the school canteen got into the spirit of the occasion. On the menu today were Halley's hot dogs, Grotto jellies and satellite sandwiches. But if none of these suited your taste, then maybe a big hunk of the blue comet cake may have been more your style.
Chairman of both the Joint Coal Board and the Hunter Valley Coal Chain Council, Jack Wilcox was addressing a lunchtime meeting of Rotarians at the City Tattersalls Club. He outlined in detail the functions and aims of both organisations, quick to point out their relevance in the current mining dispute.
This particular dispute is a national dispute, and the extent to which the board or the Hunter Valley Coal Chain Council has been able to get involved is in the background, using the trust that we have with the companies and the unions, a bridge that we've built, if you like, between the various parties, to talk to them and try and persuade them of come to some sort of solution. But it's been a very difficult battle, and there are a lot of factors below the surface that are making it extremely difficult.
Jack Wilcox believes the way to improve industrial relations and operations in the coal industry is through increased communications and awareness between unions, coal mine owners, all levels of government and overseas buyers.
No, but in the past there has been a problem where a particular issue is highlighted and confrontation arises and you get someone to take a public stance. It's always difficult to back down and back away from that public stance. We believe you can get people together and talk about something before it becomes festered and before it becomes bitter, it can be solved.
According to the District Guidance Officer for the Department of Industrial Relations, Gretley Colliery, the 2-year program is an ideal way to break into the lucrative computer industry. Successful applicants aged between 18 and 25 are trained while employed for major companies. The program has been operating since 1979, and the latest intake comes at a time when employers are crying out for experienced computer programmers.
And it's now possible for anyone, provided that they have aptitude and ability for this sort of training, to go into the program, to the opportunity to be selected for the program, and to give themselves the opportunity to become programmers. People perhaps who mightn't otherwise get the opportunity to train in other ways.
Of course, there is a great shortage of experienced computer programmers at the moment, isn't there?
There is, and it seems as if it's going to be a continuing shortage. The industry needs more programmers. There's recent publicity has been given to the shortage, and this program that the department is running in conjunction with the Australian Computer Society is seeking to do something about that shortage and to provide young people with the opportunity of getting into a very substantial and probably a lucrative career.
Margaret Young was obviously pleased when she received her scholarship at a ceremony in the University Council Room. Margaret will study economics and was congratulated on her success by the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Clem Tistel. In 1984, at the age of 35, Margaret went back to school in Tamworth and passed the higher school certificate with an aggregate of 408, placing her amongst the top 5% of students. Her return to study is even more remarkable because she has 4 children, and one of them, Stephen, stood proudly at her side during the presentation. The Vice-Chancellor of the University, Professor Don George, presented Margaret with her scholarship, and the General Manager of the Greater Newcastle Building Society, Jack Scully, handed her a cheque for almost $2,000. The scholarship is worth almost $6,000 over 3 years. Margaret says the previous winners of the scholarship have set a high standard to which she will try to live up to.
Thank you.
Officials say that the memo is another slap in the face for the staff at the Newcastle City Administration. They say there was no consultation with unions before the changes were announced, and there's been little regard for those whose promotion opportunities will be affected because of the restructuring of the organisation. The memo said that if employees refused to cooperate with the changes, action would be taken. The City Administrator, Mr Saunders, says that uncooperative staff would, as a last resort, be sacked if they failed to comply. As a result, according to one union official, many employees who would have accepted the changes without challenge are now incensed by the administrator's threat. Mr Saunders also says that Mr Lewis, who has been charged with overseeing the changes, will have until July 1st, almost 3 months, to come up with a schedule for the restructuring. Mr Saunders says the town clerk needs this length of time to decide in what order the changes should take place so that services won't be affected.
Problem, I suppose.
Dr Wedge Paradise from the Hunter Valley Research Foundation today outlined the conclusions of the $35,000 study, which looked at why students weren't going on to universities and colleges. 600 Year 11 and 12 students from 27 private and state schools in the Hunter Valley were surveyed and asked about their aspirations and expectations after they'd completed their HSC. The study, which began in June last year, found that 65% of students wanted to enter tertiary education, but only 42% 22% made it. Most said that insufficient marks was their biggest obstacle for continuing their studies, but the quota system, financial constraints and accommodation problems were also important considerations. Parental and environmental influences guided many students, and if their parents decided that tertiary education was a waste of time, their children tended to agree. Other interesting aspects of the study were that more males than females expected to enter university, but more females than males wanted to go to Newcastle CAE. More private school students intended to enter university than state school students, while there were more students from the state schools who wanted to go to the college. One of the most interesting findings of this study is what would happen if tertiary education fees were reintroduced. 15% of females and 5% of males said they wouldn't carry on to tertiary education if they had to pay fees. Professor George says this indicates that those who would most benefit from tertiary education would be most disadvantaged if the fees were reintroduced. Vice Chancellor of Newcastle University,
and also
Professor
for the
Don
community,
George,
because in
says
the long
that this study makes the first contribution to understanding what motivates or prevents young people from entering tertiary studies.
Well, I think there's a lot of value for us as educationalists and also for the community, because in the long run it's community aspirations that determine how far young people will go with their careers and training.
Do you think this will help you with further funding?
Yes, we're certainly sending the report to Canberra. I think it supports many of the views of Minister Susan Ryan. I think she'll be pleased to have this new evidence of some of the things she's been saying to the public at large.
When the 45-year-old pastor was 16 years old, he had the honour of carrying the Olympic torch from Hexham to the steps of City Hall. 30 years ago, he also set himself a marathon goal, to run the 200-kilometre trek from Sydney to Newcastle. Some time has passed since then, and it's taken him 3 days. But accompanied by 18-year-old Phil Sexton, the duo have reached their goals and aims which stretch beyond the physical.
A threefold thing. One, is a personal goal. Secondly, by achieving this, it's a bit of an illustration of what can be done in spiritual things. And thirdly, I was asked whether I'd be sponsored, and I wasn't particularly interested at the time, but I felt, well, maybe we can, support some missionary societies, which we're actually doing.
Like his running partner, Phil also has set his future goals, hoping to continue his marathon achievements.
My dad comes from New Zealand. I've been there twice in my 18 years. And I thought it'd be nice just to run the distance from the top of the North Island, New Zealand, right down to the bottom of Stewart Island.
And when do you hope to do that?
Well, I'll give it a few years yet.
Once again last night, the midnight shift at the Gretley Colliery reported for work and were asked by the management to sign a so-called agreement of service before they would be allowed to start working. Just as on Tuesday night, the men again refused to sign. The document, which would largely prevent the men from taking further industrial action, is bitterly opposed by the Miners' Federation. It is also opposed by the local branch of the Colliery Staff Association, which met yesterday afternoon and passed this resolution. The association condemned the requirement by the Newcastle Wallsend Coal Company to sign the document. Staff decided to provide supervision and coverage for the miners so they could begin production. 3 staff members on shift last night, the under-manager, maintenance engineer and the washing plant supervisor, were suspended for 24 hours for attempting to do so. Mine Deputy Manager Gary Bailey told me the men were suspended for refusing to obey an order not to start production. The 3 men in question would not agree to be interviewed or photographed in any way. Staff members now fear that they will be asked to sign a document similar to the one rejected by the Miners' Federation. The Colliery Staff Association will now take the dispute to the local coal authority. Meanwhile, the New South Wales Coal Association will attempt to prevent the miners' planned 6-day strike due to start at midnight tonight. The Coal Industry Tribunal will hear an application by the association to have the miners' bans and limitations lifted to allow negotiations on the disputed log of claims to go ahead.
All of the 7 artists featured in the exhibition have studied and are postgraduates of the Newcastle CAE and the Newcastle School of Art and Design. Victoria Phillips has chosen a combination of oil, pastels and paint in her works entitled Water Figures. The monoprints of Jane Adam highlight the involved technique of mastering photographs and silkscreen into the finished product. Nicola Hensel's collages combine delicate pressed flowers with carbon paper cloth and different materials. Other works are by Jane Lander, Julie Reagan, Dallas Bray and Kerry Harrison. They reflect personal responses to influences around them, particularly geographical. The exhibition at the Lake Macquarie Gallery, entitled Selection 7, will be on display until May the 4th.
While the hunters in the nation's coal mines braced themselves for the planned 6-day strike by the combined mining unions, 11th hour peace talks were underway at the Coal Industry Tribunal in Sydney. The tribunal ordered the lifting of bans and limitations by both the miners and the mine owners. The Newcastle Wallsend Coal Company agreed to withdraw its requirement that miners at the Pelton Ellalong and Gretley Collieries sign a no-strike agreement, a move that resulted in the miners being locked out over the last 2 days. Last night, the swing shift at both mines was able to work before the midnight start to the national strike. The strike went ahead because the combined mining unions said they did not have time to call it off. Despite the tribunal's order, the National Liaison Committee will not meet to consider ending the strike until Monday morning. At this stage, the tribunal still plans to hear the dispute on Monday afternoon, despite the strike. The tribunal will suggest a settlement based on agreements reached between the miners and the owners at meetings chaired by the Federal Minister for Industrial Relations, Ralph Willis, last month. Mr Willis has described the strike as irresponsible. In a further blow for mine owners, the huge conglomerate Japanese Steel Mills has told the Coal Association that until the dispute is resolved, it will not send any ships for our coal.
Lions Club member and top super sedan driver Bernard Roberts is out to win the feature race in his class. And in his work-supported Rover, he must be rated a chance, as he is always thereabouts. Former State Champion Bob Brewer in his Pontiac Firebird, now fitted with a new engine, must start one of the fancies, with state title holder Johnny Pine in the Pit Crew Pontiac. The Charity Classic is the feature at the meeting that will also have street stocks, hot rods and stock cars.
It's a collection of 11 paintings and 5 screen prints by James Willarant. While James is from Sydney, he was introduced to Newcastle's Ocean Baths area in 1978 and has been inspired by the opportunity it gave to his recreational themes idea. It's quite a distinct treatment, strongly stylised, and while he treats his subject to satisfy his ideas, he leaves almost a photographic reproduction for the viewer. And James Willarant is the only artist I know who paints around the corner of his canvas. The recent pool painting exhibition is combined with an exciting jewellery collection by Tony White. Stones for the interesting and unusual jewellery were collected in Jaipur in North India, and it's the first time the collection has been shown in Australia.
Changed in the 2.5 years I've been involved in.
Resigned from council in January over what he claimed was the council's handling of the salamander issue. He says Saturday's result justifies the stance he made. He won the extraordinary by-election with 1,628 votes, well clear of the next candidate, Diane Beeston, on 782 votes. 8,000 ratepayers were eligible to vote in the by-election, but there was only a 37% turnout at the polls. Innes Crichton says he believes many of the problems confronting the Port Stephen Shire Council have been created by a lack of communication between councillors and the general public.
There would probably be, up until I resigned from council, there were possibly 30 reports that were called for over the previous 2 years. Not by me, but by other councillors, that still haven't been furnished to council, and I think that that shows a lack of information coming back to council. If the councillors as a whole wanted that information and agreed that it should be submitted to them, and 2 years later they still haven't got it, there's something wrong with the system.
Meantime, President of the Port Stephen Shire Council, Councillor Roy Taylor, says all matters before the council, including the Salamander project, are dealt with under the correct procedures of local government.
I don't think anyone can criticise us at this particular time for saying that there's any secrecy about Salamander, because the meetings are all open, they're attended by media, there has been a Salamander committee elected, other councillors come and sit in as observers on this particular meeting, and as I say, there's nothing that we should hide and nothing we would want to hide. So all detail on Salamander is up and before the public and councils themselves.
Lloyd's Bar Beach would be the envy of any enterprising restaurateur. It was leased to Lloyd Moffat in 1977 for $130 a month, with increasing yearly rents for 10 years.
Together with
According
the new tax
to a former
on fringe
alderman,
benefits,
John Manning,
loss of
the
entertainment
council decided
expenses
on
as
the
a
low
tax
rent so that
deduction
Mr Moffat
is
could
expected to
afford to
raise a lot
renovate
of
the
money
old
for the
pavilion.
government.
Mr Moffat
entertainment
says
expense
he has
factor will
spent
raise more
$400,000 on the building since he took up the lease 8.5 years ago. Part of the lease agreement was that a kiosk would be open during the summer months. The administration says it's received a number of complaints that the kiosk has been closed, and despite repeated warnings, the complaints have continued to come in. Mr Moffat has denied that he hasn't kept his end of the agreement. Nevertheless, the Administrator Colin Saunders has decided not to extend the lease. This puts to rest Mr Moffat's plans for $100,000 extensions to the pavilion and his bid to obtain a $60,000 hotelier's licence. Mr Moffat, who has said that his restaurant is a great asset to tourism in the area, was unavailable for on-camera comment today.
I still think people will...
The lease expires in August next year.
Thinking about it, it's a little bit early to